Good morning again, everyone. This is the second day, second part of the Doctoral Seminar Cardiovascular Integrates European Award, Cultural Roots of the Council of Europe, Culture, Heritage, History and Memory for the Promotion of European Values, Integration and Peace. We will have now the presentation by Andrea Elena Grigore from University of Seville, Adding Women to the History of the European Union, the Right and Duty of the European Citizenship. And she will be introduced to by Professor JÜRGEN ELVERT. I could introduce him in many different ways. We're good friends now. It is a friendship that has been forged through many years of joint work. He's committed to this work. He's one of the founding fathers of this doctoral seminar. He hasn't been able to come here all the editions of this seminar, but he's always been a member of the jury. And he has tried to contribute to all the students. He's a Jean Monnet Professor of European History and Professor of Modern History and History of European Integration at the University of Cologne since 2001, although he is now retired. And he can maybe devote some more time to us. He was a visiting professor at the University of Innsbruck in 1996-97. He was a senior fellow at the Center for European Integration Studies at the University of Bonn from 1999 to 2005, and fellow in residence at the Aarhus Institute for Advanced Studies. His main areas of interest are modern European and European integration history, history of the British Isles, intellectual and cultural history and maritime history. Among his recent publications are The World, the Sea and Globalization. He has sailed many seas in the European context, and he will be a compass for the researcher that will be presenting her work right now. Jürgen, you have the floor.
Colleagues, Miguel, thank you very much for this very kind introduction. I see the subtext behind it. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you feel well and that you have already acclimatized yourself in these beautiful surroundings. And this brings me again to a big thank you to the foundation for, as usual, the very generous hospitality we experience whenever we are here. That's really amazing. That's why I don't consider it as work, but as a very, very nice holiday to be here. And the rest is, it's also very nice. It's interesting to discuss your papers with you. And yes, I have the great pleasure to introduce to you today a young researcher from Seville, who came all the way from Sibiu in Romania, from the forests of Transylvania to the palm trees of Seville, to study law there and to fight for human rights, which is very impressive. And we had the occasion to talk a bit about your work. And the work you do there, this is not only studying law, but it's also to practice law, as you told me. And it was very impressive for me to see someone, full of idealism still. That's the privilege of youth. To retire is the privilege of age. But I wish you all luck. And you are going to talk to us about a topic which actually should be a matter of course. Equal rights for women within the European Union. But when you read the figures and statistics, you still find indication of pay gaps, for instance, of inequality on several stages. So this is a work which still has to be completed, and I'm convinced that you will, in the range of your possibilities, contribute to this, Andrea, and that's why I give you the floor right now.
Thank you, Professor Elvert. I'm very grateful for your help today. Estimados profesores,
Dear professors, expert colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would first of all like to thank this opportunity that the Yuste Foundation has given us, to us the youth. It is a great honor to be able to be part of this program, this place, and this working group. And I want to thank our experts, the professors, the interpreters, and all the technical team for all the time you share with us, your patience and your commitment with our training and the improvement of our research. After 3 years of my PhD work, working alone today, I see myself as part of a group. That's important too. I would like to thank you for your generosity and your advice. That will help me improve my work. Yesterday was a very enriching day. I learned a lot, much more than I expected, so I will be very satisfied and happy with what I take from here. I would also like to thank my colleagues for the time you're spending with us and your pieces of advice, your points of view, and the expertise we are all acquiring as young researchers. Usefulness is important in life. My name is Andrea. I am a PhD student, third year at the Department of Theory and Law Philosophy, University of Seville, and my PhD dissertation is about displaced people due to globalization and environmental issues. And I will talk about vulnerable people, minors and women. But I decided to focus on women because it would be very difficult to talk about it from just one perspective. I tried to look at several aspects regarding women. That's why I would like to analyze the feminine point of view from this perspective too. My commitment is not just as a young researcher or a legal person. I am also an activist. That's my singularity. I am very committed. I am part of several entities and associations regarding that do social work for refugee protection, such as, for example, Spain with the UNHCR. I've been a teacher at the Spain with the UNHCR Association. I work on urban gardens, urban orchards. That's one of my personal projects because I have created as an association in Seville about Romanian roots. Well, today I would like to focus on my work, adding the women perspective to the history of the European Union, rights and duties of the European citizenship, because I think that is part of an active citizenship, and we must remember what this means for the society. But if we talk about this word remember. In Spanish is recordar, which means putting it through the heart again. And so it's like adding memory for the present, for the past. We must not forget the women who were part of the European construction. We have to pay tribute to them and all their achievements. We need to understand the status quo of this question by using an actionable perspective of the philosophy of law. I'm not trying to oppose genders. This is important. I need to emphasize it. I'm not opposing genders. I am just trying to fuse them together from a perspective of respect, proximity, and empathy. We try to place the spotlight on a dimension that tries to study women and their value in the European construction. We all know, we are all aware of all the political and legislative advances that we have lived in the national and supranational entities for gender equality and women protection, even if there is room for improvement. But we might not aware of the feeling of the society, what society thinks about women integration, and social projects do have a say in this integration. That's why when we talk about adding up, not just highlighting, adding up, it is inevitable for us to talk about the issues that still persist in women issues in Spain: discrimination, disparity, gender violence. The main stakeholders are the European Union, states, member states, international organizations, civil society, and women themselves. Our methodology: we want to study the question, the set of standards, and the social considerations through bibliography and a series of interviews that we have performed. We have interviewed several people from several fields: children and young women, young men, and middle-aged men and women too. And also children at school, and the opinions of the children are very, very interesting when you ask them about women's role in society. The objective is to try and highlight the role of women in the European construction as the cornerstone for the European identity. For a civil society that is committed, we also want to generate a collective memory of the European Union construction that needs the sum of all of us, men and women. So I have performed a series of interviews to people, as I have just explained, and also entities. The European Document Center of the University of Seville, the association Spain with the UNHCR, and an association that fights gender violence, also located in Seville. Those are the three entities. The impact of this work: transmitting or conveying to the academia that this is an issue, although I'm sure that there are works that are better arranged and more complete than myself. But I especially want to focus on the society and the connection with the cultural roots, because women are the perfect social catalyst for all this social and cultural work. Because women are the fabric or the glue of the community. and that's why societies can be close-knit, thanks to women.
El trabajo lo vamos a...
The work will be organized in 4 different sections. The first one being about the current context of the European Union. The second one is the work of the civil society, or the role of the civil society in the fight. The third section is about pioneers, and the fourth one is about European legislation. Then I will talk about my conclusions. John Lennon used to say that we are all better when women are empowered, because this leads us to having a better society. It is true, because women's role in the social, cultural, political life is bigger and bigger, but benefits are for the whole European society. So I will talk about some preliminary questions. We need to understand the global situation and then the situation in Spain. Why? Because full participation of women on an equal foot in all aspects of society is a fundamental human right. And nevertheless, across the world, women and girls are significantly underrepresented in the political arena and also in leisure activities, and of course in the workplace, even if the situation is changing little by little. So the following situations will analyze in better detail this panorama or this overview based on gender imbalance through time, to see how the progress is moving slowly. Because there are patriarchal traditions and standards that are deeply rooted in the society, the consequences are overarching, and they negatively affect personal welfare and the economic future of women and girls. And this happens to everyone. Only 1 out of 4 members of parliament are women, so 3 out of 4 are not represented in the parliament. So in 1975, the United Nations decided to create the March the 8th as the International Women's Day, to pay tribute to their fight to be part of the society as full members. When the world decided to pay tribute to women on March the 8th in Spain, we were just finishing a dictatorship that had limited the role of women to being just housewives or mothers. For 40 years, women could not perform any activity without a tutelage. Working or opening a bank account or owning goods or even traveling, they needed permission from their fathers or their husbands for that. And let's think about the Nobel Prizes. Only a few women, around 60 women, have been awarded a Nobel Prize throughout the years. So progress means leaving no one behind. Women and girls are critical if we are to find solutions for the most important challenges that we're facing. So we need to listen to them, we need to value them, we need to appreciate them, so that their perspectives and their choices will be reflected in the shaping of a new society. The current context in the European Union, which really is important for us, is what I'm going to talk about next. In the Treaty of Rome in 1957, the equal pay principle was established. Ever since then, the European Union has kept on facing and fighting gender discrimination. Today, Europe is one of the places in the world that is safest and most equal for women. But we still need to fight for some of their rights. Women in Europe should be able to enjoy empowerment, safety, equal pay, which is not a reality for many women. The statistics show that women are underrepresented in some decision-making positions in the political and business arenas, and their pay are on average 16% lower than those of men. Gender violence and stalking is still on vogue, and they are not offered the same opportunities in the working places, for example, equal pay. So we should be helping men and women to find a better work-life balance in all aspects of their lives. We also need to tackle violence against all women and girls and promote gender equality across the European Union and the whole world. The European Union promotes gender equality in the decision-making positions, as I have said, but there's still much to do. The European Commission in all those fields is based on its strategic commitment for gender equality. Many women are not fully economically independent, and that is one of the barriers for their participation in the working life, in the working field, and that's one of the reasons why they tend to work less than men and in industries with lower pays. So the possibilities they have to access better paying positions is limited. But the European Union is committed to facilitating the same employment opportunities to women and also equal pay, because gender equality is not just a women's issue, it's a man's issue, because it is part of the central pillar of the human rights tenets of the European Union in all fields: participation in the labor markets, working conditions, and career paths. There is a directive from 2014 that forces big listed companies to publish information about their boards and their diversity policies, gender, age, and career paths. But in real life, not everything revolves around work and money. There has to be a balance between working life and normal life, family and other fields. This is an important consideration both for men and women. So the initiative on work-life balance of the European Union complies with the equal treatment pillar and reinforces the existing rights of the European Union to try and rebalance the chores, the working tasks and the domestic chores between men and women. For example, we have several working permits. For example, we have paternity leave as well as maternity leaves, and also some more other leaves for example, in cases of pregnancies and for family care, because that's a way to try and improve the array of care services and leaves for families in general. For example, there are also special leaves and special permissions for health issues. And the European Union has tried to give equal opportunities to men and women to enjoy and to have a good health and good health care. regardless of their gender. The European Union takes into consideration the specific needs of women in their daily or in their different programs and expenses, and every year the European Social Forum assists thousands of people that have difficulties in accessing the labor market. For example, for women, there are specific measures, such as, for example, the professional retraining programs, the capacity building programs, and also special programs for women to go back to work after interrupting their career.
For instance, by facilitating quality services and individual attention and improving awareness among the staff regarding the challenges women face. The success of many of their initiatives means an actual change in the life of people. The projects funded in the EU regions can offer women new opportunities by delivering or providing access to funds, personalized advice, opportunities for a business, training. And just to give you an example, we're going to speak about the Unigate platform. It's a one-stop shop for women who want to launch or expand a business. For instance, in tourism, we've heard about this yesterday, and they might have this opportunity with this platform. And there is information on training, mentoring, counseling, and contact networks. They can also find out about lending, credits, and all that can help them expand their businesses if they already exist. These are mechanisms available for them. The web is also taking measures to promote the participation of women in the digital sector, and they are questioning stereotypes. In artificial intelligence, for instance, they're promoting education on digital platform, and they're making it easy for women to carry out business actions. The platform was launched with a goal to make women and children in the digital, to make them able to collaborate and share experiences and best practices in that field. Likewise, about 20 technology companies have engaged in offering an inclusive and balanced environment from the point of view of gender. The web is also committed to bridging the gender divide in research and innovation. For instance, the Horizon 2020 program helps research bodies and also universities to apply gender equality plans. Every year, the EU Award for Innovative Women acknowledges women who are not only excellent researchers and great innovators, but they are also successful entrepreneurs. The web is also taking actions to increase employability of women in other sectors such as transportation. Everyone has a right to have a life without violence. That is still a problem nowadays. However, violence towards women and children is increasing worldwide. We've seen this during the pandemic. It's been very difficult to protect women inside their homes during the lockdown. In many places, attitudes towards women contribute to that problem. The Euro surveys reveal that violence against women is still accepted and even justified in some EU countries. Most of the victims of human traffic are women and children. The legislation against human trafficking makes it mandatory to make gender-specific measures along with economic programs, financial programs to support the member states. All the EU member states and also the EU itself have ratified the Council of Europe Convention, also called the Istanbul Convention on Violence Against Women. The convention that forces to protect all the victims of violence and to prosecute the perpetrators. The No Name EU campaign encourages men and women alike to oppose to women violence against women. The EU is also funding projects to fight against gender violence and support the victims through the Rights, Equality and Citizenship program. Worldwide, in 2017, the EU and the United Nations launched the Spotlight Initiative to remove and eliminate all forms of violence against women and children. The EU is supporting the initiative with an engagement of 500 million euros. We are seeing that part of the solution are the European funds. It takes money to produce equality, and the EU is doing it. Every year, the European Commission is publishing a large report on the situation of women in the EU. The justice bodies in the EU play an important role to promote equality between men and women, making sure that the EU legislation can be interpreted and applied in the same way in every EU country. We are seeing also that it is very important to promote and publish and underline the situations, and it's also important to have support in courts, because it is useless to put the money on the table if the justice is not keeping up with society. The European Institute on Gender Equality is supporting the member states and the EU in their endeavor to promote and guarantee the equality of opportunities for men and women within and outside Europe. We need to remember the commitment of the EU, not just within the EU with its member states, but also beyond our own borders and also beyond our frontiers. The Gender Equality Index of the Institute is doing a follow-up. The European Commission is supporting civil society networks such as the European Lobby of Women, Women Against Violence, the European Network for different networks on these fields, and it's also important to have platforms for women and everyone advocating women's rights so they can get in touch and so we all can get together at a civil society level. It is useless to sit in our own countries not united in common platforms. These organizations collaborate very closely with the EU institutions in matters related to women affairs and equality between men and women. The EU is working to help women break glass ceilings in the world of business and politics, and that's why it collaborates with governments and NGOs designing activities at a EU level on balance between men and women at the higher levels. It compiles and disseminates information and best practices. It's also important to remember the publications and best practices that we need to include in our daily life and in every walk of life. In December 2019, Ursula von der Leyen became the first EU Commission President. Christine Lagarde took on the most important position in the bank, and she's the first president ever. And it's also important to mention the defender of the European people and her duties. The rules governing employment in the EU institutions must be applied without discrimination for gender, and that includes retribution. The staff has a right to paternity, maternity leaves, and offers its employees a work environment that's respectful and flexible. That is a way to set a good example. It is useless to tell others what they need to do if we do not set a good example. The Commission has a strategy to promote work-life balance as well as the well-being of the employees. The goals of the EU is to improve the lives of women and girls through its policies by replicating the EU model and setting an international example, especially the gender equality framework and empowerment framework for women. With this framework, the EU aims at supporting associated countries and especially developing countries, candidate and neighboring countries, to achieve good results in gender equality as set out by its action plan. The EU is fighting to achieve gender equality in cooperation and development by turning it into a priority in political debate, and it's a strategy with associate countries. For instance, in the context of trade negotiations with Chile, the EU, for the first time, has set provisions on trade with gender equality. The EU focuses on gender equality and specific gender measures in different fields. Capacity building in developing countries, support to women associations, and dissemination of information on gender equality. They are also leading the negotiations including gender equality in the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development. The EU acknowledges women fighting for their rights throughout the world, such as Nadia Moral in Lamia Hiya Shad, survivors of Islamic State at Malala, a Pakistani defender of or advocate of education for children who got the Sakharov Award of the European Parliament. Also, candidate countries to the EU, they also must take in completely the equality principle. And they must work towards the integration of the EU in that field and to integrate this in their own structures. This is still a priority to the expansion process. And we're going to speak about civil society because we've seen that the EU integration process is very complex and it's large, and it takes a number of policies favorable to an industrial, economic, and political, legal, social, and cultural union of states, totally or partially in Europe and its surroundings. Its social and cultural part are taking a more and more important role. The EU process that's based on its union through the single market and the currency union must come together with the cultural integration endeavor and the adaptation to a sensitive European model. We can remember here the principles of the European construction, the problem of a democratic deficit that made that citizens were not very happy with being a part of Europe. They did not feel themselves as European citizens. Only through shared values and principles can help us overcome so many different cultural, language, and other barriers. a common identity is an important thing, and it's essential. Civic behavior is also essential. Here's the major challenge for our European society. We need to persevere and keep on working on our ability to talk to each other. It is still poor because the civil society is rather working at a local level, and it's very hard for them to transfer their capacities to the European level. And that's why the Commission promotion of different funding programs to develop digital platforms over the past years is going to be very helpful. There is also a representativity problem for the civil society. It is scattered and not very coordinated. That's our reality. And this is why it is desirable to create collaboration, strategic platforms for civil society in each country and also in the whole of Europe. And this is why during my interview, when I interviewed different associations, I heard that they are trying to participate in platforms so they can reach European funds and also achieve more unity in civil society. It is not enough to have a single currency and have economic strength. It is also important to build identity and feeling of belonging to a cultural community that gives a sense to what we are by collaboration with other human beings. We have taken EU pioneers. We consider them to be key players, and we all together have to work towards this. The EU member states have an equal distribution of the representation of women in the national parliaments. Only in 4 countries there is at least 40% of women. That's in Spain, Finland, Sweden and Belgium. The percentage of women representation in the EU Parliament is completely different. Finland has 47% women in its national parliament, but in the EU there are only 3. The EU always has had a problem with this. There were no founding mothers in the 50s. And women perceive this as just a group of white industrial men that were not very interested in women's well-being. And it is necessary to have more involvement of women in cultural, social and political lives of their communities. The EU regulation regarding equality is very large. There is a huge number of directives supporting and protecting women on inequality and gender violence, but what I'm about to summarize now is that equality is one of the goals of the EU. It's a reality, and as years have gone by, legislation, jurisprudence, and the amendments of the treaties have contributed towards the consolidation of this principle and also its application in the EU. The European Parliament has always been a great advocate of equality between men and women, and this is included in the treaty since 1957. The EU is rooted on a number of values. Among them, there is equality because it promotes equality between men and women. On the 5th of March 2020, the Commission adopted its strategy for gender equality 2020-2025, setting forth an ambitious framework for the next 5 years to promote gender equality both in Europe and other continents. The strategy is based on a European vision where citizens are free from violence and stereotypes and have the opportunity to prosper and lead regardless of their gender. I know that it's been a little bit long, so I'm going to get to the final conclusions. And to conclude, I'm going to tell you a tale. The name of our continent comes from a Phoenician princess, according to the Greek mythology. She is called Europe. The European Union has in its own name the name of that princess. And in its 7 decades of history, the EU has reinforced the importance of European women by inspiring its way to lead this project. There are many projects ahead. The world is moving forward in every possible way. Also in discrimination. Discriminations are always one step ahead. But there is an important thing that I would like to say. There is hope. And we can see it in European women who have taken one step forward to defend our rights, from the environmental ethics to making a reality of our wishes for peace. There are peaceful women, pacifist women, Mama Erasmus, Sofia Kotrari, or Greta Thunberg, a young activist. Young people are taking the relay. The pioneering grandmothers such as Berta von Sundberg, the promoter of the Nobel Peace Prize, and young activists such as ourselves. Activists against climate change. And there is a common thing. That's the fight to defend the destitute, to defend peace, and the commitment to the values of freedom and justice. For years, we only heard about founding fathers such as Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, Konrad Adenauer, Gaspari, among others. Now, the European institutions have changed their wording, and now it's pioneers, men and women. Thank you very much for your time and your patience.
Well, thank you very much for this very complex topic to be cut down in 45 minutes. Thank you very much. I mean, you've shown us the potentials and limits of European policy, especially on the, not only, but also on the gender level. I mean, you have been talking about the fathers of Europe, the founding fathers of Europe. That's true. Eric and myself had been part of a research project which actually dealt with the founding fathers of Europe. And of course, we also thought about it. Why are we only talking about fathers? And that's obviously the result of centuries-long social development processes. You know, I mean, the 50s were pretty much closer to handing over election rights to women in the end of the 19th century. You know, maybe nearly all of the founding fathers of Europe were born in the time when women successfully claimed to have the right of vote as well. On the credit side of the work of the founding fathers, except from starting the integration process in general, is the Treaty of Rome with its provisions, you were rightly referring to it, to gender equality. But when we recall that the treaties of Rome were signed in 1957. We are talking about 68 years of existence. So during the past 68 years, only, many texts have been written, legal texts have been written, but you've rightly pointed out that the difficulties of applying these legal texts to social reality. Yeah, and this is an aspect which actually can also be seen as a characteristic of the European Union. The European Union can or is able, thanks to its construction, to identify certain societal limitations, yeah, and to open and show ways how things could be improved, like, for instance, on the field of gender equality. The problem is the transfer from the European level down to the national, regional and local level. You've indicated the problems on the local level, on the basis, so to speak, to apply the legal texts which have been created on the very high European level. And I also was thinking about the application of European values on on global communication lines between the European Union and third-party states, like Chile, for instance, or take China right now in the debate. Yes. Yeah? How to apply European values on negotiations with the Chinese government. I mean, that's a real big thing, you know, to do it.
It's a challenge.
It is, yeah, I would even say it's more than a challenge. It's a real big challenge. Yeah, but this is typical. I was also reminded, for instance, at the peace process in Northern Ireland, which may surprise you a bit that I did this connection, but I did a bit on Irish history, and I observed the peace process between 1988 or the late 1980s and 1998. And being a specialist for European history, I was often asked, which role can the European community in these days, or later on the European Union, play with regard to create a peaceful solution for the north of Ireland? And I said, well, there is not very much to do for the European Union. First of all, the parties have to find a solution between themselves. But what the European Union can do is to identify certain targets which could make sense, and also to offer a place for negotiation. That's it, the framework, you know, the framework which can be done. So this is just a few impressions and reflections on your paper. Thank you very much for it, Andrea, and I think the discussion should be open now.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Jürgen.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. I think some hands, but please don't take more than 3-4 minutes in your intervention. So, Stephanie, I have the floor. I'm really sorry because this topic really strikes a chord with me, because I devote every minute of my life to gender research. So we really need to make the most of the time we have. We need to dignify the work of many women that a century ago were at the spotlight of the European issues. I wouldn't say that women are a vulnerable collective. I'm really obsessed about words and etymology. I was talking to my colleague. Not vulnerable, maybe vulnered, but not vulnerable per se. So you're talking about adding feminine to the history of the European Union, a duty and a right of European citizenship. I don't understand how the first part of your presentation or the first part of the title fits with the second part, because it's so broad. And then you focus on descriptive speech, but we must not convince anybody People will be convinced by looking at the facts and the things and the data women have made. So I think it's not beneficial for us to talk about vulnerable people. I'm really very nervous. Maybe we should talk about the shape, about how women or the women's role has been shaped by the European Union. For example, think of Maria Zambrano, Anna Arendt. They used to talk to all the leaders. They were at the center stage. It was a political issue. We're not vulnerable. It's a great disservice. In some universities, there is a subject called History of Feminism. And we study all the laws that have been ever passed in Spain about feminism since 1954. And we should talk about Margarita Nelken, who exiled to Mexico and died there in the 50s. And we have people from the aristocracy and also people from other walks of life. Maria Campoalange from the University of Seville, who really went there at the center spot, at the spotlight of the fight between genders. Then María de la O Lejárraga, maybe some of you know her. She was at the center stage of the political arena in La Rioja region. And she was talking about abolitionism at the beginning of the 20th century. They were part of these political discussions. I work with newspapers of the 19th century. They were represented by the press just with their names. It was for aesthetical reasons, but I don't want to talk about that now. We should take into account Carmen de Zulueta, who wrote 100 Years of Spanish Education, who exiled to America, Concepción Arenal, and a long series of women. I would also like to say there's no support from the European Union, and I know this is controversial. I think there is some affirmative action in that case. I was awarded the Maria Zambrano Prize. I have received special support. I understand, but look at this panel of students. How many women can you see here? It's a great disservice if you say that we are vulnerable. We're not vulnerable. And let's talk about plagiarism, because some people use this topic, feminization or women, to say that women are underrepresented. And that's a great disservice for all women who really work and do research. Just an example, I went to Exeter University and my director, Nuria Capdevila-Argüelles, gave to me lots of books from María de Maeztu and other writers. And I said, no, because I'm not studying the 20th century, I'm focusing on the 19th century. And she said, you have to learn them, you have to read them if you want to understand the 19th century. Well, please be brief, because everybody deserves the right to intervene. Teresa Freises, thank you for choosing this topic, which is a really important one. I was surprised to see, however, that since you're a legal person, you haven't talked much about legal considerations. Legally talking, or legally wise, equality in the European Union is a right, a fundamental right, and it has many legal considerations and standards and laws, etc. So you should have talked about it. Even if you have said that the European Justice Court is important, you have not quoted, you have not mentioned any single sentence. For example, the University of Göteborg judgment and many other judgments that have led to massive layoff cancellations in issues of equal pay and equal treatment, because there is enough legal foundations for all the deploy of cases and examples you have mentioned. Without the delimitation of the European Court of Justice, that would have not been possible. All the standards and laws that we have are partly thanks to it. Well, I'm talking about my field, the legal field, and then you can reshape it to your point of view. Not all standards have the same values or the same effects. And throughout your work, you have given much information, but we don't know whether you think a special clause in a treaty is equally important, or if you think something someone said is as important as what is said in a treaty. Well, that would be useful for you to try and ascertain, to try and decide which is more important. Thank you. If I may, I would like to reply to you now. This work is larger, and I have narrowed it significantly, and I have left out the legal grounds because I wanted to rework it, I wanted to revisit it. I will be also talking about the pioneers. So I will have to reassess the limits or the scope. I have done groundwork on that, but it's very difficult to try and prioritize or to choose some of the things you've mentioned. But it is true that I have quoted the judgments. So yes, I have to restructure this work. Thanks for your advice. Thanks for your recommendations. That was the first draft. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Those were comments, constructive comments. Possibly you've done that work already, even if it wasn't reflected on your presentation. We will take it into account in your final paper. But please remember that you have to limit your work to 20 pages, 50,000 characters. Thank you, Andrea, for the presentation. You've talked about civil society. I just wanted to say something about it because I'm really touched by it. It really strikes a chord with me. The structure of the civil society. But I think you can use some associations as a reference. For example, civil society groups or social platforms, which are two civil society organizations platforms that represent several collectivities, feminist associations and women's associations, environmental associations, etc. That you might find that useful. I wouldn't say that the European civil society is unstructured. I don't agree with you, but I think you can talk to them. There is also the Economic and Social Council that tries to involve the civil society, and that is just in the European Union. And then worldwide, there are other structural mechanisms that we can discuss about deeply if you want. Thank you, Professor Grigore. number 2. Thank you, Andrea, for your presentation. I'd like to say that my first impression was that sorry, it's not working. When you were talking about your work with kids, I was deeply moved. And you talked about the Romanian Association. You talked about the Romanian alphabet and tales and stories you've written. I will be happy to read them. And you were talking about memory and history. When Dorov joined the Yuste Academy as a member, and I talk on behalf of the rest of members. No, he talked on behalf of the rest of academicians, and he talked about a princess. A Phoenician princess, and I recommend you to read it. Well, I don't want to spoil it for you, so please read it. Anna.
Well, I echo what has been said so far by other colleagues and young colleagues as well. Of course, you will have to a bit narrow down, I think, your research question, because it has to be one very clear research question. And if you want to look at this theme, I think, from the legal point of view, what I would suggest is not only to focus on hard laws and the existing legal instruments, but also to look at the soft laws and the ways that the gender equality is being actually lived and promoted on the European level. So, for instance, when I won this prize, Sofia Goradi was here with us, and we had very long discussions on what does it actually mean to be a founding mother of the European Union. So that prompted me actually to write a text on the role of gender in European memory, especially in European institutions. It's called Does Europe Prefer Sons Over Daughters? You can find it online. It's a very short, but I think very interesting article that touches upon many things that you have said. So these kind of soft laws on the European level might be a way for you to narrow down your research and see how this promotion of gender positive discrimination, if you wanna put it like that, is working at the European level. So we have seen over the last 5 or 6 years that European institutions are working very hard to tackle this issue because it has been addressed so far. It's not being ignored. So you now have squares in Brussels, in Strasbourg, with the name of Simone Veil, for instance. So there are ways of honoring women and including them into European history, into European memory, especially by the European institutions. So this may be one of the ways for you to narrow down your research. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Ana. Professor Boussier.
I agree completely with you. I remember we received Simone Veil here 10 years ago. Yeah. So it's a radical change in the parliament when she was elected. And I think you make some historical references. But I think you reference as too much global. You have a lot of publication about your subject, in history, but also you have to put this publication inside. I can give you a few ways to find them very easily, but I think you need really that kind of input.
Lo tenemos en el...
Yes, I have included it in my work, but the information was too extensive, and I had included all the founding mothers, de facto, Simone Veil, and all the rest. But we decided to decide what to include and what not, both in the legal part and in the pioneers section because it was too long. Thank you, Andrea. Unai, thank you for your presentation. It's, of course, a topic that should be present in all seminars. Yesterday, I was talking about using glasses, and in this case, it will be that would be the purple glasses in this case. But you were saying that women are the perfect catalysts for cultural and political issues. But I think this is a very hard gender role. For example, if you remember the UN Assembly Women, Peace and Security is a progress compared to what used to be before, but at the same time it's like narrowing women to always the same topics because women are linked to traditional care roles, and well, they are the perfect characters, perfect protagonists for the women, peace, and etc. Now, I was making the connection with the cultural roots because I wanted to talk about what would their added value be. I wanted to connect cultural roots with women empowerment in all senses, in all aspects. So I was referring only to the cultural part, because otherwise maybe it would be too broad. And I have a second remark. Maybe you talked about it, but I'm not sure. I wanted to mention Ursula Hirschbank, the founder of the European Federalist movement. That is not always mentioned, but it is important to mention her. We have the pioneering founding mothers, then the second rank, and the local pioneers. But I have to structure it and see if I can include it in the 20-page work. I didn't want to leave anyone out. It was very difficult for me to leave things out because I'm a legal person. I wanted to talk about all the legal mechanisms and standards, and I wanted to really include everything, and then I realized that I couldn't, but it is true that I had forgotten to include the judgments, and I need to restructure the pioneers section. Thank you, Andrea. I feel identified with you because the synthesizing will be the most difficult part of this work. It has to be synthesized and it has to be original at the same time. All your contributions and all the remarks that you have heard are very constructive, and I hope you will find them useful for the final version of your presentation. I also understand that this is a very broad topic, and the difficulty lies in synthesizing and find the most relevant issues. We still have time. Maybe Professor ELVERT, maybe you want to add something else, a final contribution or a final remark? No? Well, I know this is too broad, and I was lucky to have Professor ELVERT by my side. He helped me a lot, even if we didn't have much time. So we have worked on it as much as possible, but I know that can be difficult sometimes. I know finding the right scope is the most difficult thing, and I wanted to include as many regards as possible because we cannot have our view. Thank you, and the final work I'm sure will be aligned to our expectations, and you can have the help of all the experts and colleagues. Thank you. Thank you to stick to the time, because that way we still have 2 minutes left that we can use for the following tables. We have a 2-minute break.